Today we are talking about being bold and telling people the truth. So we will start by looking at the ways that we are bombarded with lies or half-truths in our everyday lives. What lies are you referring to, Brad? Politics? News? Projections of U of A tuition growth over the next 4 years? No. All of these are good candidates, but we're going to talk about marketing and advertising. Exposing the real-life Don Drapers of the world and their silver-tongued deceptions. Now, there are a lot of places you can see this, but we're going to look at department store pricing. Let's say that I'm looking to buy dress shirts, which I am almost all the time. I wear them to work every day. I like them to be wrinkle-free because I don't iron. And I married a woman who doesn't iron, so we don't iron. And I like them slim fit. You know, got to show off the hourglass figure. Let's say I'm shopping online or in the store Kohl's. This is often where we go shopping for clothes. And let's say I see the following shirt. This, which looks white, it is not, looks like this is a slim fit, wrinkle-free shirt in roughly my size in opal. Not blue, which is more accurate when I looked at it on my computer. It's opal, so more expensive sounding. But check out the deal. Between the sale that's going on and using the offer code I didn't even know about, that's USAVE, I can get this shirt for $28.04 when it regularly costs $55. Almost 50% savings. So I crushed that shopping trip, right? Right? 50% savings. Now, here is where there is a very misleading word that pretty much all of these stores use. The phrase regular price. This sure sounds like that is what people usually pay. Like this shirt anywhere else, without our great sale and promo code you did nothing to get, would cost you $55. Well, we all have the internet. This isn't hard to figure out. Let's see where people are paying $55 for this shirt. Now, this list isn't perfect, but it took 0.80 seconds to produce with Google. Does this shirt cost $55 anywhere? It does not look like it. In fact, it looks like I can get this shirt or something very similar through Van Heusen/Izod, which means direct from the manufacturer, for almost $10 cheaper. Further, I clicked around for a while. I didn't find anywhere or any way to actually pay $55 for this shirt. It's either impossible because the price is fake, or it's really hard and only possible in a store. So, it appears that the word regular does not mean what people usually pay, and is more of a point of comparison created by the manufacturer and retailer to create the illusion of a slam and deal when you go shopping. How dare these companies deceive us, we cry, when shown the truth. Someone should do something. In light of these fake prices, doesn't a store that has the real price always listed sound better? An everyday price that doesn't have fake sales or a bunch of coupons you need to find just to get the price down to what it should have been anyway. I know this sounds better to me, and this is exactly what JCPenney did several years ago. Under new CEO at the time, Ron Johnson, who was fresh off huge successes at Apple, where he was the driving force behind creating and expanding the Apple Store, Johnson implemented fair and square pricing at JCPenney. How did it go? Well, here's a chart of their sales from 2004 to 2018. Pretty notable drop starting around 2011 to 2012, which is when they implemented the fair and square pricing. They went, not only did the sales drop immensely, they went from making money, making profit, to losing over $1 billion each year. And even though Johnson is now gone, they still have not recovered to profitability. So I would say it did not go well. People did not want fair and square pricing. It turns out that consumers like the constant sales, the coupons, the savings compared to an inflated price that no one actually pays. This is an illusion that is part of people's shopping experience, and when given the option to forego the game of inflated savings, people voted with their dollars to keep the illusion going. This is just one example of a pervasive lie in our world that people are very attached to. And frankly, while I find this annoying, and as long as you know what's going on, it's not really that bad. It's not like when we're getting coupons and looking for sales at Kohl's that we're being cheated. It's more that we think we're getting an extraordinary deal when we almost never are. So we feel better about ourselves, which is fine. But where it can be more dangerous is when we feel like we have to buy something because it's such a good deal. Almost 50% savings. How can I say no? When we start buying things we don't need because of this illusion, there are negative effects on people's lives. But there are certainly lies out there that are more problematic. Just in the area of marketing, there are ads that tell us that products will make us healthier, happier, more fulfilled, that other people will like us if we buy them, often based on very shaky science or studies or just claims that cannot be verified. And that's all just lies or half-truths that are designed to get us to buy things. What if someone in our lives has bought into the idea that to show their worth, they need to achieve more than everyone else? And they spend all their time always working or always studying, trying to maximize their efficiency, limiting their sleep so they can be the most successful, the top of the class. What if we see in the world around us systematic injustice, people being enslaved, people being exploited, people being mistreated? What if we see people being cheated, charged impossible to overcome interest rates on payday loans, or being saddled with credit card debt that they'll never be able to repay? What if we see people believing that they can have sex freely with a lot of different people and that it will have no impact on their future relationships or on their lives? What do we do? How do we love like Jesus in these situations? Well, there are passages in the Bible that show us how Jesus behaved in similar situations. So let's take a look. From the book of John. It says, it was nearly the time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace. This is a pretty unique passage in the Gospels. Jesus does not do this a lot. He's very angry, so let's dig in a little bit to understand why. And I'm going to focus on the money changer part, but the animals part is really very similar when you unpack that. So the first thing to understand is that at the time, Judah and the city of Jerusalem were part of the Roman Empire. They primarily used Roman currency in the Roman Empire. Also, during the Passover, every good Jewish person had to come to Jerusalem to take part in the ceremonies. And while there, they had to pay something called the temple tax. However, it was not permitted to pay this temple tax with Roman currency that they had to use for everything else in their everyday lives, because Roman currency had idolatrous images on it, which were not permitted in the temple. So while they were there, they had to exchange their Roman coins for shekels, which was the currency that the temple tax was paid in. So with all of these things combined, what you have is like an entire country worth of people all coming to the temple, all, or at least most, needing to exchange the coins that they use on an everyday basis for shekels. It creates a massive amount of demand for someone to exchange their currency. So what happens? Well, think of it like Disneyland. When there are a bunch of tourists there all day to see Mickey and ride Space Mountain, but they also need food and water, what does the Disney company do when the demand is this high? They charge outrageously high prices for food and water. And the same thing was happening with the money changers at the temple. The difference is, we all understand that Disney is a for-profit corporation that is trying to make the most money that they can. While the temple, as Jesus points out in his rant, is meant to be a place of worship and prayer, not a marketplace. The service that the money changers were providing was necessary, but they were exploiting the mostly poor people who were traveling to Jerusalem that had to be there to observe the requirements of their religion. And Jesus sees this injustice and he puts a stop to it. He is bold. He is defending the people who either cannot or will not defend themselves. So why does Jesus do this? Well, I think first that the people are being lied to. They are likely being told that the exchange rate being given is fair. Perhaps it's the regular exchange rate paid by everyone. And he knows how this is going to affect their lives. And second, Jesus loves these people. Both in the Jesus loves everybody sort of way, But also, Jesus himself is from Nazareth. So among the people traveling to Jerusalem and being cheated out of their money are his family, his disciples, his friends, and his followers. Jesus' love for these people drove him to boldly and violently expose the lies that they are being told, disrupting the temple courts on one of the busiest days of the year. And today we're talking about how to love people like Jesus loved people in this and other passages when he confronts people, by boldly telling the truth. And this is a little harder for us to grasp as a form of love than the things we've talked about in some of the past weeks. So I want to talk through it a little bit. We'll start with talking about airplanes. So have you ever been around a kid on an airplane who was super disruptive? I have. I think we've all at least seen this in movies. Most of the time the kid is young. Most of the time I am very sympathetic to the parent because having a kid crying or throwing a fit on an airplane is terrible for a parent. You know you're disrupting everyone around you. You know you're being judged by people who think you should be able to control your kid. And really, the people doing the judging, they don't have kids. They probably just have dogs, or even worse, cats. Most of the time when this happens, the kid is below 5 and tired, and it is perfectly fine and normal, and that is kind of how kids of that age behave. However, sometimes it's a kid that's like 9 or 10 or older and is just kicking the seat in front of them for no identifiable reason, seemingly just for fun. Now, it is certainly true that there could be something going on with this kid or with his parents. And as we talked about last week, giving grace to people in these situations is absolutely the right thing to do. But for the sake of argument, let's say that there is not some extenuating circumstance. At that point, this is a case where no one has loved this kid enough to teach him. It's usually a him. Girls have other issues, but usually not kicking seats. No one has taught this kid that he's being awful to people when he does this. The child likely has parents who virtually never discipline him, and the result is a kid that no one wants to be around. Now, in the mind of this parent, they may think they're loving their child by not being harsh or raising their voice. But the reality is what's going on is a parent not doing the hard parts of parenting, not helping their child grow into a fully functioning kid and then a fully functioning adult ready to go out into the world. The result is not good for the kid, it's not good for the parent, and especially not good for the person sitting in front of him on the airplane. Now, similarly, if we meet a child who's been spoiled or a grown-up that is the result of the same thing, we don't exclaim about how much their parents love them because they gave them all these things. We lament that they didn't love them enough to take the time to teach them about hard work and about being grateful for what they have. This is the type of love we're talking about and that Jesus regularly displayed. The kind of love that requires us to be brave, to tell people the truth because we know that they need to hear it and we know that it may not be well received. And we've already looked at one situation where Jesus was bold in his love, defending the poor when they were being exploited by money changers in the temple. Here's another example of how Jesus told bold truths to people who needed to hear it. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. Blind guides, you strain your water so you won't accidentally swallow a gnat, but you swallow a camel. This is one of many examples of harsh words Jesus has for the Pharisees. Pretty much all of that chapter, Matthew 23, is just like that. It's, one after another harsh words Jesus has for the Pharisees. So if you'd like to read more, that's a place to do it. And when reading through the Gospels, it is easy to get the impression that the Pharisees are like on the total opposite end of the spectrum from Jesus when it comes to the religion of the day. But actually, the opposite is true. In the book that inspired this series, Love Like That, the author Dr. Les Parrott writes, of all the religious groups of his time, including the Sadducees, Samaritans, Herodians, Essenes, and Zealots, scholars agree that Jesus, the rabbi from Nazareth, most closely matched the profile of a Pharisee. He obeyed the Mosaic law, quoted leading Pharisees, and often took their side in public arguments. The Pharisees devoted their lives to following God, tithed to the penny, and obeyed the strict laws of the Torah. They held to traditional values and were model citizens. So as you read through your Bible and all of the sections where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, take note that he is not usually at odds with them about their theology because they essentially agreed. His words, like in the verse above, were all about them missing the larger points of following God. Among them, loving people and having their hearts match their actions. It is likely correct to understand Jesus' harsh words for the Pharisees in a couple of ways. One, as he said a few times, he was unhappy about the burden that they placed on people and the lack of mercy that they showed to the everyday people in the application of the law. And second, these are the true things that the Pharisees needed to hear, and he was one of the few people who both knew the truth about their hearts and was bold enough to tell them the truth. And I think it's important as you read through these passages to understand that while the Bible talks about the Pharisees lumped in a big group, that they are a collection of individuals. And while the group may not have heeded Jesus' words and changed their path, some of the individual people may have. At the very least, we know that Paul was a Pharisee before his conversion. And this is a group of people that had a lot of drive and passion for their beliefs. Jesus is loving them enough to tell them that their zeal is pointed in the wrong direction, and to do everything he can to help them get on the right path. And this leads into a major point that I want to spend some time on. In this situation, Jesus is basically just lambasting one of the most powerful sects in Judaism at the time. He is often purposely harsh, as in the passage we just read, following the model of the prophets of the Old Testament, trying to wake up a sinful generation to get them to repent. Now, to me, both of these are best understood as the way you would talk to a toddler who is about to run out into a busy street. You don't whisper sweetly, because if you aren't heard, they will get hit by a car. In this situation, you yell at the top of your lungs. The toddler hears you, probably ends up crying because you scared them, but they don't run into traffic. This is what God is doing when he speaks through the prophets in the Old Testament, and what Jesus is doing with the Pharisees during his ministry. He is saying, you don't see that you're about to wander out into traffic and get hit by a car. The problem is, when we think, or when we are doing this or thinking about doing it, it's really important how you do it. For one thing, it's really good to be right. So the best application of this sort of thing for us is confronting a friend, a loved one, or a fellow believer about destructive or sinful behavior in their life. We talked last week about being gracious, about not judging people. If you do this wrong, it will absolutely be judgmental. So how do we do it right? Well, I think that the most important part is all tied up in the name of our series that we're going through, Love Like That. Anytime this sort of conversation is needed, we need to first understand what our motives are. Are we motivated by love for this person? Is the goal of the conversation we think we need to have for their life to be better? Are we trying to save them from bad outcomes in this world or for their souls? Or alternatively, are we really bitter about something that they did or said to us? Do we want to show that we are right and that they are wrong? Are we using the guise of telling the truth in love when really we're just looking to prop ourselves up? So is our motivation love for another person or something more internal and trying to make ourselves better? All right, so that's extremely important. But once we have the motive side straight, we need to make sure that our approach is also loving and focused on truth. When we talk to someone in love and our goal is to help them be better or avoid destructive behavior, we should be open to the possibility that we don't know the whole story before the conversation begins. It is possible and even likely that there are parts of whatever the situation is from their point of view that we did not know. A conversation like this needs to be handled with some amount of humility, especially the first time it is talked about. So after this point, there's a possibility that the other person won't listen or won't agree. Again, it is very important to be sure that you're right, that you're speaking the truth, and that your motive is love for the other person. But if this happens, it is appropriate to be much more direct and clear the next time around. The following passage from Matthew gives a good model to follow for the specific situation of someone within the church sinning against you. It says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. But if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. Now, I would advocate taking this sort of escalating approach with most of these type of conversations. Start out private, and like I said before, with a good degree of humility. You could be wrong. You want to hear their side of the story and to understand, but you want to express your concern and help them avoid big trouble in the future, that sort of thing. Then you adjust depending on what the other person's response is. First of all, you may learn that you're wrong and that there's actually not that big a problem, which is the whole purpose for the humility in the first place. But potentially if they are defensive or completely denying, things might escalate. Hopefully, as the verse says, there's some humility on their end too. Maybe they don't completely agree right away, but say they will think about it and consider what you said. This is good. Remember, a lot of the time, the areas people need to hear the truth the most are places where they're blind to their problems. People who are completely aware of their issue and are trying to change aren't usually the ones you end up telling the truth to in this way. All right, so the other thing I want to talk about real quick is being on the other end of this sort of conversation. How do we react when we are on the receiving end of someone telling us the truth in love? And by the way, you can think you're going into one of these conversations as, you know, the giver of feedback. It can quickly become two-way. Just to, you know, just think about that. If you read through the Bible, especially the books of wisdom literature, it's pretty clear how to handle these situations in general. Here are a couple of examples. Better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. Then, my child, don't reject the Lord's discipline and don't be upset when he corrects you, for the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. Now, I think we all understand, both from experience and just logic, that being told you're wrong or that you've hurt someone is really hard. It isn't easy to hear criticism, even when it's about something that's not ultimately that important. And when it's a loved one telling us how we've hurt them, it can be devastating. But in these verses and throughout the Bible, it states how the wise listen to criticism and that discipline from God and from wise people is immensely valuable. You see, when this is done correctly with truth and love, this sort of conversation or confrontation is immensely beneficial, not for the speaker, but for the receiver. If someone who loves you, who you know to be wise, and who you trust is speaking truth into your life, do not focus on how it hurts. Be thankful that you have someone in your life who will tell you the truth that you need to hear, and be open to changing based on what they say. So based on kind of that sort of logic and what it's saying in Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, I think it's actually a bad sign if these sort of conversations are not occurring in our lives or in our families or in a group of friends, and especially in a body of believers. So I'm going to spend the rest of our time talking about the things that hold us back from engaging in these sort of conversations and talk about how to improve on that. I think there are 2 factors that drive these telling the truth in love situations. The first one is centered around how much you love the people in your life. We talked earlier about how the kid who is 9 or 10 and is kicking the seat in front of him on an airplane is likely a kid whose parents did not love him enough to discipline him. We just read that the Lord corrects those he loves. So if we don't feel that we should correct the people we love in our lives, perhaps we don't love as deeply as we should. Here's a quote that I think gets at this well. It's from the book Love Like That Again, but it's quoting C.S. Lewis, so it's kind of like a double quote, 2 layers deep. It says, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to be sure of keeping your heart intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safely in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from the dangers of love is hell. I think this is fairly dangerous for us because we have in our culture a preference for kind of leaving each other alone, letting everyone find their own truth or keep their own version of the truth. We highly value independence. We value self-sufficiency. And there are good parts of this, but there are bad parts of it too. Because as we just read, love is being vulnerable. Love is needing people, not falsely insisting that we don't need people to avoid rejection. Love is hurting with people when they hurt. Love is hurting for people when they're going down a bad path and wanting desperately to help them avoid it. When we love people deeply and vulnerably, we can't keep quiet when they're in trouble and they can't see it. We have to tell them. We have to scream at our loved one who is about to walk out into a busy street and be hit by oncoming cars. And honestly, as terrible as this is, I think this is the biggest reason that I don't have more of these conversations. I am pretty bought into the whole live and let live mentality. You can have your problems, I have plenty of my own, or even just, I'm really busy and I don't really have time to engage on your problems if you're not asking me for help. These are blatantly unloving attitudes and are the opposite of loving people like Jesus does. Frankly, these are Pharisee attitudes. If you reread some of those passages, focusing on my own problems or my outward holiness with little care for mercy, justice, or the hardship of others that I'm causing, or at the very least that I'm not helping with. So strange as it may seem, one of the biggest things we need to do if you're like me and have this issue is to be vulnerable with people. Take a risk and open up about your life. Talk to someone about how you've been hurt. Tell someone about things that you're afraid of. Let someone you love really know you, which means knowing the bad stuff that we usually hide. The thoughts that we're ashamed of, the things that they do that hurt us, even if we know it's basically our fault because we're being selfish. We need to have people in our lives who really know us and who love us anyway. So, handwritten, and so I would make a decision if I would share things. I'm going to share things. I think this is really important. So, a little bit about me. Let's see. I work at Raytheon. I've been there a long time. I'm a manager. A lot of our life looked pretty good. I've got kids. They're awesome. You see them running around here. I've got a great wife. Got a house that we moved into. It's really big. We got a pool. Awesome backyard. Things look very, very, very together from a career standpoint, from a family standpoint. And there's certainly truth to that, but in the middle of all that stuff, I am regularly afraid and insecure about my job. I text my wife, it's been a while, but I text her regularly that I think I'm going to get fired. I don't necessarily think that when I'm being logical, but that is the fear that I feel coming to the surface and me trying to express it. I regularly feel like I am not doing a good enough job with my kids. By the way, kids are really hard. I see in them both things that I'm immensely proud of, and I see some of their worst characteristics, and I know that they either got them from me or the decisions that I've made have added to that. And that's really hard. And, you just assume that they're going to be talking to a counselor someday and it's going to be, my dad did all this stuff to me. It was his fault. That's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. There's everyone who you think looks like they have it together. On some level they do. There are certainly things I've got figured out that we're doing fine on, but there are certainly things that we don't. One of the things that's great you come up here and, generally the person speaking, you feel like they've got it together because they were, able to write something and come and present it to people without crying, which, I'm getting close. And honestly, the only way that doing that works well is the knowledge that God uses imperfect people all the time. If I thought I had to be good and perfect, I would just never be up here because that's certainly not what I am. I just want to encourage people to be authentic, to be vulnerable with people, to love people as they really are, and to let people know who you really are so that there is at least the opportunity for people to love you, to love the real you. A couple more quotes to kind of cap this part off. These are again from Les Parrott from Love Like That. It says, "Here's the hard truth. Love is dangerous because love means risking rejection. Jesus fearlessly risked not only his reputation, but his very life for the truth." And then, "We are never real until we open our wounded hearts. Everyone's heart has been wounded, but most of us would rather protect our wounds than divulge them. That's why we wear masks and stifle our true feelings." So the first step in being bold is being bold enough to expose ourselves to other people and letting them know and have the chance to love who we truly are. Okay, I said there are two things that keep us from telling people the truth in love. The second is not being bold, or on the flip side, or more negatively, it would be being fearful or cowardly. In other words, there are people in our lives, we love them. We know that we should have a hard conversation where we tell them the truth, but we kind of wimp out, or we just never get around to it, which is kind of the same thing. I do this too. So there are times at work, I manage a team of 7 people, where I know I have to have a hard conversation with an employee, and I put it off way longer than I should. I know real-time feedback works best, but when you know that feedback is going to be negative, I seem to find all kinds of other things to do instead. The same thing happens when we realize we need to have a hard conversation with someone we love. For instance, I probably need to have the talk with my son Zane, talking about sex and pornography and all kinds of other things that will have uncomfortable words like wiener and things like that. That's how I'll do it. I love him enough to know that I need to do this, but I haven't done it. I tell myself it isn't time yet. Maybe as he starts middle school next year makes sense. That's probably true. I think that's what I'm sticking with. But I am also so not looking forward to it that it's possible that I'm fooling myself into waiting too long. It is so much easier to let things sit and not be addressed when it's a different situation, when it's a friend or a spouse, and we don't have the parental obligation to raise and shape them like you do with a child. I think on the boldness side, most of the time we kind of know if we should be telling someone the truth, and we just aren't. I do think, because like I said earlier, that our culture is so big on leaving one another alone and not judging, that we sometimes let that just be our excuse, or to mute the things that we believe that we should tell the people in our lives. So I will say again that the Bible is pretty clearly not saying that. There are plenty of passages about living life with people, about being all intertwined with our family and with other believers. Nowhere does it say to leave your brother alone in his sin and trouble, for it is none of your business. It does say not to meddle or gossip, but it certainly does not say to keep your mouth shut when you see someone you love heading toward addiction, or wasting their lives chasing money or fancy cars. It doesn't say stand by quietly while your roommate never goes to class and drops out of school. These are things that our culture may say to leave the other person alone. It's none of your business, but God certainly does not say that. So if you are suffering from a lack of boldness, first I would just say to be honest with yourself, name it for what it is, and decide to do what you know is right, and then actually go and do it. This is both that easy and immensely hard. It really is. You can decide to go do something and do it, which is essentially what being brave is. There's fear, but you decide to do what's right anyway. If you're having trouble, another thing I would suggest is to talk to someone you trust about it. Someone who is wise, a counselor or a friend or a mentor. The benefit of talking to another person is that they don't have to have the conversation, so their judgment is not clouded by fear. So they can pretty easily reinforce that having the conversation is the right thing to do. Also, generally, when you both agree that this is the right thing to do, it will help you to actually do it because you've said it out loud to another human. You can even plan to meet up again at some point and talk about how it went. And this is not really because how it went is any of their business necessarily. Much like none of our lives is really a counselor's business. It's simply a forcing function to do something that is difficult. It helps us be bold because we don't want to look weak to another person who we said we would do something to. All right, we're coming to the end, so I'm going to recap kind of what we've talked about as a reminder. First, Jesus told people the truth boldly because he loved them. I shared the example of him clearing the money changers from the temple and his word to the Pharisees. But if you read through the Gospels, he says some hard things to Peter more than once, to Martha, to his disciples as a whole. What he did certainly included his friends and his followers. And if we are to love like Jesus, we need to do the same. We need to love people so much that we are willing to risk being uncomfortable, risk conflict, anger, and rejection to tell them the truth. And when we do this, we need to make sure our motivation and our method are rooted in love. Boldness is important, but only when combined with love at its core. We also talked about reasons we may not be having these telling the truth in love conversations. The first and biggest reason is that we've walled ourselves off from other people and made ourselves less loving as a result. If there's no love, then there's no drive to tell people the truth in love. And lastly, sometimes we don't tell people the truth in love out of fear, just not being bold. So I pray that as we leave here that we would be a people who love one another enough to be truthful, to challenge one another to do what is right, to be better, and to grow together as a result. And I'll leave us with one last verse that sums this all up very well. This is from the Gospel of Luke in the Message paraphrase. It says, "There's trouble ahead when you live only for the approval of others, saying what flatters them, doing what indulges them. Popularity contests are not truth contests. Look how many scoundrel preachers were approved by your ancestors. Your task is to be true.